She walked into the interview calm, qualified, and overprepared, but they looked at her like she didn't belong. What they didn't know, her husband had just bought the company and he was watching everything. Renee Carson knew how to carry herself at 43 with a solid career in strategic marketing under her belt and more professional poise than most executives, twice her salary. She didn't second-guess herself often, but that morning as she parked her gray Acura in the underground garage of a sleek glass paneled building in downtown Austin, her hands paused on the steering wheel for just a second longer than usual. She stared straight ahead, took one deep breath, then gathered her leather folder, smoothed her navy blazer, and stepped into the elevator. Her heels clicked with confidence. Her resume was airtight, her references strong. This interview at Bradford Keenan and Associates wasn't just a job opportunity, it was her chance to rebuild after stepping back from the workforce for nearly 2 years to care for her father. Renee was ready to re-enter the game, and she wasn't coming in halfway. The front lobby was sleek but impersonal, white walls, sharp lighting, modern art that didn't say much of anything. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman with a powdered face, glossy ponytail, and a gaze that flicked up and down Renee's body like she didn't belong there. "Good morning," Renee said, smiling. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. interview with Elaine Beckman." The receptionist blinked, almost startled by her warmth. She tapped something on her keyboard and glanced at her screen. "You're Renee Carson?" "Yes." A pause, then came a feint before she picked up the desk phone. Her voice dropped into something hushed. Her eyes never left Renee. After a brief exchange, she set the phone down and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Someone will be right out," she said. Renee thanked her and sat down on a gray bench near the glass wall. She checked her watch, 9:52. Early as always. She looked around, no one else waiting, no hustle of staff or movement of candidates. Just silence and cold air. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At 10:07, a tall man in a slate suit stepped out from a frosted glass hallway. He didn't look at her right away. When he finally did, his face registered polite surprise, like he'd been expecting someone else. "Renee Carson?" "Yes," she said, standing. "I'm Devin Marks, director of marketing. I'll be sitting in with Elaine today." He didn't shake her hand, just turned and gestured down the hallway. She followed him. No chit-chat, no "how was your drive," just the rubbery squeak of his shoes on polished tile. In the meeting room, Elaine Beckman sat with a laptop open, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't stand. "Let's get started," she said. The questions came rapid fire, but not the kind Renee expected. "Are you sure this is the role you applied for? How familiar are you with client-facing tech? Have you worked in an office this size before? Why the 2-year gap?" There was something underneath each question, something off. The tone wasn't probing, it was doubting, borderline sarcastic. At one point, Elaine raised an eyebrow when Renee described handling international accounts. "International from where exactly?" "Singapore, Toronto, Frankfurt." After 15 minutes, Devin closed his notebook. "Actually, it looks like there's been a miscommunication. This position was filled internally last night," he said. "Apologies for the inconvenience." Before she could speak, Elaine added, "We'll keep your resume on file." They stood, no handshake, no escort, just a quiet motion toward the door. Renee walked back to the lobby. The receptionist was already on her phone. Pretending not to see her, the elevator doors opened. She stepped in alone. No one thanked her for coming, but before she even made it to the parking garage, someone upstairs had already seen everything. On the 10th floor of that same building, behind a wall of tinted glass, Julian Maris stood completely still. He hadn't moved since the receptionist picked up the phone. From his vantage point, he'd seen the way her eyes narrowed. He saw the way Devin adjusted his tie when he spotted Renee. Julian had watched the entire thing in silence, hands behind his back, jaw tight, every word of the conversation filtering through the live audio feed in the observation suite. 3 days earlier, Julian had finalized the majority acquisition of Bradford Keenan Associates. Quiet, deliberate, and not yet public knowledge. He didn't do press announcements. That wasn't his style. Julian was 47, clean-cut, calm in the way a man has to be when everyone in the room wants his signature. Born in Lubbock, schooled in San Diego, he made his name building mid-sized tech consultancies into multi-million-dollar firms, and when he saw the numbers behind Bradford Keen along with its glaring lack of diversity in leadership, he didn't hesitate. But this wasn't just another deal, this was a litmus test. He wanted to see who he was inheriting. No scripts, no rehearsed welcomes. He didn't tell anyone who Renee was. She'd offered to sit the whole thing out, but he asked her to go just to see what would happen, and now he had his answer. "Playback the last 2 minutes," Julian said. Beside him, a junior legal analyst tapped a few keys in the dialogue, repeated through a discreet speaker. Elaine's tone, Devin's indifference, the way they cut Renee off in that phrase, "We'll keep your resume on file." He said nothing for a moment, then turned toward the panel on the wall and pressed a button. "I 1 hour in my office at 11:30, he said, his voice flat. The assistant on the other end hesitated. "Which hour?" "Manager, sir." "All of them?" "A beat." "Yes, sir." Julian stared out across the city. Austin shimmered in the late morning sun. A small plane crawled past in the distance below. People moved through their lives unaware that a very different meeting was about to take place. Upstairs down the hall, 2 former board members were seated in a transition room. They had no idea a reshuffling of executives was already underway. Julian had spent his first 48 hours reading everything: memos, internal chat logs, interview notes, hiring stats. There was a pattern, and not a subtle one, across 6 years. Nearly all mid-level and senior hires looked the same on paper. Same universities, same zip codes, same coffee clubs, different names. Same old. Julian didn't talk much about his past, but he'd seen enough of this kind of thing when he started out. The tone, the dismissal, the backhanded skepticism. They called it culture fit, he called it comfort bias. He paced once, stopped and turned to his analyst. Do we have the camera angle on the front desk? Yes, I want a full copy of this interaction, audio and video. I want it time stamped and logged. I'll have it sent to your office in 20 minutes. Julian nodded. Thank you, Leanne. Then, without another word, he walked out. Back in the elevator, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. For a moment he wasn't angry in the traditional sense. It was more like a confirmation, a puzzle piece falling right where he knew it would. He texted Renee, heading home soon, don't go anywhere just yet. She didn't respond right away. She probably needed a moment. He understood that, but before he hit the lobby, Julian already knew one thing for sure. If these people thought they could evaluate her with a checklist and a smirk, they were about to learn what it looked like when the tables turned. But upstairs the clock was ticking and not everyone would see the reset coming. Renee walked toward the parking garage like she had bricks in her shoes. It wasn't anger that weighed her down, not exactly. It was something heavier. She kept her head up, but each step echoed louder in her mind than it did on the polished floor. The elevator doors closed behind her and that cold, controlled environment faded by the time she reached her car. The early confidence from that morning felt like a lifetime ago. She opened the driver's side door, slid in and closed it. She didn't start the engine, didn't check her phone, just sat there, the sunlight streaking through the concrete slats, casting lines across the dash. Her hands rested in her lap. She wasn't crying, but her throat was tight. She glanced at her reflection in the rear view mirror. Her lipstick was still perfect, hair still smooth, her blazer sharp, and yet somehow she felt invisible. 15 years in marketing, 5 major campaigns, 2 Fortune 500 companies on her resume, and not once had she ever been asked if she was sure she applied for the right job. She exhaled slowly. Renee had been out of the field for a while, yes, but not out of touch. When her father's health took a turn in 2021, she dropped everything, no hesitation. She managed his medications, appointments, meals, and moods with the same precision she once brought to quarterly performance reviews. And after he passed last winter, she took 6 months to rest, to breathe, to figure out who she was again. Then one afternoon she looked across the dinner table at Julian and said, I'm ready. He didn't ask what she meant, he just reached for her hand and said, then go get what's yours. So she did. Renee spent the next 3 weeks revising her resume, researching firms, updating her portfolio, and practicing mock interviews with friends from her old team. She read industry reports late into the night, made a list of companies with strong upward momentum, and started booking interviews. Bradford Keene was top of the list, and they hadn't even looked at her. Not really. She thought about what Julian had said to her the night before. I know what you're worth, you know what you're worth. The room either sees it or they expose themselves. Either way we win. She'd smiled then, thinking he was just trying to ease her nerves. She hadn't realized how serious he was. Her phone buzzed, a text from him, heading home soon, don't go anywhere just yet. No punctuation, which meant he was focused. She knew that tone even in a message. She thought about calling him, thought about sending a half-laughing, half-frustrated text. You were right, but she didn't. Something told her this wasn't over yet. Something told her Julian wasn't just watching, he was planning. She reached into the passenger seat, grabbed her notebook, and flipped it open. On the inside cover, written in her own handwriting, were 4 words: your presence is power. She closed the book and sat still for another moment. Then she turned the engine on, backed out slowly, and eased into the light. No anger in her expression, no panic in her breath, just stillness, the kind you see right before the sky changes color. But while Renee was gathering her thoughts, others were scrambling to rewrite theirs. Devin Marks was halfway through his tuna sandwich when his phone lit up with a notification from internal comms: mandatory hour meeting, 11:30 sharp, 10th floor, boardroom, attendance required. He blinked, checked the sender, then the time. Elaine, he called from his office, mouth still full. You get that invite? Down the hall, Elaine Beckman was adjusting her blouse in the window reflection. She didn't turn around. Yeah, came through 10 minutes ago. Any idea what it's about? No clue, she replied, still smoothing the crease in her collar. Probably something to do with the merger paperwork. Devin shrugged and returned to his desk. He didn't think much of it. Just another day in the corporate shuffle. Our meetings popped up all the time, usually about compliance updates or employee surveys. No one read, but across the building a very different conversation was happening behind a locked door. Julian stood in the corner of the boardroom, arms folded, expression unreadable. To his left was Leanne, the junior analyst. Beside her, 2 our directors, Rosa Levington and Martin Cross, both of whom looked like they were walking into an ambush they hadn't trained for. Do they know? Julian asked quietly. They think it's procedural, Leanne replied. He nodded once. Good. At 11:28 Devin arrived. Elaine followed. At 11:29 they walked in, laughing about a client misprint. Until they saw the setup. No projector, no agenda, no paperwork, just Julian. He didn't say anything at first, let the silence hang in the air like steam off a sidewalk. Elaine cleared her throat. Sorry, we weren't told what this was about. You will be, Julian said. He looked to Rosa. Go ahead. Rosa opened a folder and pulled out a stack of transcripts. These are excerpts from this morning's interview session with one of our external candidates. She began, specifically the 10 a.m. appointment with Miss Renee Carson. Devin blinked. Wait, what? Elaine squinted. I thought that was cancelled. It wasn't. Rosa said. Martin, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. The interview was logged, recorded, and observed remotely, as is our new protocol under the company's equity review policy. Elaine shifted in her seat. Are we being accused of something? Rosa's tone didn't change. You're being given the chance to explain the interaction. Julian finally stepped forward. You both had a chance to evaluate a candidate who met every qualification listed in your posting. In fact, she exceeded several of them, but instead of conducting a fair interview, you asked her if she applied to the correct position and then told her the role had already been filled. Devin's jaw worked in silence. He fumbled for a reply. We had a late internal applicant come in. He started after the 10 a.m. slot had already started. Julian asked. Elaine shifted again. With respect, this candidate didn't seem like the right fit. Her background was a bit scattered. There was a 2-year employment gap to care for a terminal parent, Julian Cuton, which was clearly stated on her resume. Neither of them spoke. He stared at them. What else didn't you see? Or more accurately, what did you see that made you decide she wasn't worth the full half hour? Elaine opened her mouth, closed it, and looked down. Julian nodded slightly. That's what I thought. Devin was turning red now. Look, we didn't mean any harm. It was a misread. Happens sometimes. Julian's voice was calm. Happens to who? Silence. Here's what's going to happen, he said, stepping back. A full review of your department's hiring history is underway. Every candidate you've passed on, everyone you've hired, we're looking at it all, and when the press release goes out next week about the leadership transition, your names will not be on it. Elaine's head snapped up. Wait, this isn't personal, Julian said, holding her gaze. It's structural, and I don't have time for excuses that pretend not to be. But while the boardroom filled with silence, one woman was already walking back through those front doors. Renee's heels tapped a slow, steady rhythm across the lobby floor. This time no receptionist met her with a glance, no hushed whispers, no sideways looks. Instead, a tall man in a gray suit stepped forward as soon as the elevator doors opened. Miss Carson, he asked, calm and respectful. Yes, right this way. Mr. Morris is expecting you. She followed him through a private hallway she hadn't seen before, lined with framed awards and client testimonials. The air here felt different, cooler, still not the sterile chill of the front lobby. Something else, anticipation, or maybe just respect. They stopped outside a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline. The door opened and Julian stood to greet her. He wore a soft expression, eyes searching hers for a signal. Was she okay? Had the fire burned her or only lit a fuse? She gave a slight nod, no smile, but she was ready. He turned toward the others seated around the table, 3 senior executives, a legal rep, and Rosa from our everyone. Julian began. I'd like you to meet Renee Carson, strategic marketing lead with over 15 years of measurable high-impact results, and until 2 hours ago someone on your hiring team told wasn't suited for the job she helped to define. Renee didn't flinch. She stepped forward and spoke clearly. I'd like to clarify a few things, she said. I wasn't looking for a favor when I applied. I wasn't hoping someone would see my potential. I know what I bring to the table. I don't need someone to validate it. There was a beat of silence. Rosa nodded gently. One of the execs jotted something down. I took a career break because my father was dying, Renee continued, and I don't apologize for that. What I won't tolerate is being reduced to a bullet point that gets tossed aside without consideration. Julian stepped back and let her have the floor. Renee turned slightly toward the legal rep. I know that organizations are under pressure to present as inclusive, but here's the thing, real inclusivity can't be staged. It shows up in moments like this and how people are treated when they walk through the door, not just when cameras are rolling or press releases go out. The room remained silent. Attentive. One of the executives, a woman named Carla Baines, leaned forward. Miss Carson, I don't have an excuse for what happened this morning, and I don't intend to offer one, but I wanted to ask honestly, if given the opportunity to lead here, would you still want it? Renee paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the moment deserved the weight of thought. Then simply, I came here this morning looking for a chance. What I got was clarity. I don't need to work somewhere that hesitates to see me. I'm not a maybe. I'm not someone to take a chance on. I'm a proven investment. Julian's mouth twitched just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Carla sat back impressed. Renee turned to Julian. We good? He nodded once. Always. As Renee left the room, she didn't look back. The hallway outside felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. But while Renee walked away stronger, the company was left figuring out how to rebuild what she exposed. The next morning, Bradford Keene's internal email system lit up like a fire alarm. Subject line: leadership update and organizational shift. Employees clicked with curiosity, half expecting the usual corporate fluff. What they got was a wake-up call. The company's new CEO, Julian Mars, introduced himself formally, not just as the latest in a line of executives, but as a hands-on owner with a very clear agenda. He didn't waste time with vague promises. He listed names, dates, changes effective immediately. The hiring division would undergo a complete audit. A third-party consulting team would take over recruiting until the review was complete. 2 senior department heads, Devin Marks and Elaine Beckman, were no longer with the company. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. What happened? Why then did something go down with the merger? By noon, the HR floor felt like a different world. Closed doors, quiet conversations, a kind of tension that hung without needing to be explained. Julian kept his door open. He wasn't interested in hiding. He'd made a decision, and now it was about follow-through. The company had spent years building a reputation for innovation, but no one seemed to notice that the faces making decisions all looked the same. That changed now. Around 3 p.m. Carla Bain stepped into Julian's office. She turned us down, she said plainly. Julian looked up. Good. Carla raised an eyebrow. She deserves better than a scramble for PR offer, he explained. Let her write her own next chapter. We just gave her the material. Carla nodded. Still would have been good to have her. She's not gone, Julian said. She's just not here. Across town, Renee sat in a quiet cafe with her laptop open. She was reviewing a proposal draft 2 days earlier. She'd made up her mind. She wasn't going back after the second interview, if you could call it that. She walked out of that glass building lighter than she'd felt in months. Julian hadn't asked her to accept the job. He hadn't pressured her to stay involved. He just asked what she wanted, and what she wanted was hers now. Her own firm, her own rules, her own table, not waiting to be invited to someone else's. She'd already secured a handful of clients from her former network, people who'd reached out quietly over the past year asking if she was ready to consult. She hadn't said yes back then, but now she was more than ready. The business would focus on brand storytelling and consumer strategy with a clear mission to uplift underrepresented voices in the process. She'd call it True North Strategies. Julian had smiled at the name. The barista set a cup of coffee on the table beside her. Here you go, Miss Carson, she said. On the house. Renee blinked. Sorry. The barista smiled. Shy. My aunt told me about what happened yesterday, said you handled it like a pro. Renee didn't say anything right away, just smiled, took the cup and nodded. Once outside the window, the sky was beginning to turn gold, but while Renee started building something new, the people who underestimated her were still busy trying to explain what went wrong. That evening, Renee stood at the kitchen counter slicing lemons for a pot of tea. The house smelled like rosemary and sage. Leftovers from the roast Julian had made earlier. She heard the clink of ice in a glass behind her as he walked in and leaned against the fridge. You know, he said, when I asked you to go to that interview, I wasn't testing you. I know, she replied, still slicing. You were testing them. Julian chuckled under his breath. I didn't think they'd fail that hard, not with cameras running. That's because you still give people the benefit of the doubt. Renee carried the lemon slices to the stove and dropped them gently into the simmering pot. The tea hissed as the citrus hit the surface. They saw what they wanted to see, she said. That's always been the problem. People look right past you and think they're doing you a favor by making quick decisions. Julian walked over and rested his hand on her back. You didn't flinch though, even in that boardroom. I've never seen you that still. She smiled slightly, not looking up. Still doesn't mean silent. They stood there for a few beats, quiet but full. Then Julian said, they offered it, didn't they? The job. Renee turned off the stove. They did. And I told them I had a better one lined up. Julian raised his eyebrows. You name it. Yet True North Strategies. He nodded. Thoughtful, strong, clean. Yours. She poured tea into 2 mugs and handed him one. Do you think it'll matter, she asked suddenly. One woman walking away, one firm starting small. Julian sipped before answering. It matters more than a headline. Most of the change we need doesn't start in press releases. It starts in rooms like that one. It starts when someone stays calm and doesn't let people off the hook just because they're uncomfortable. She didn't answer right away, just stood there watching steam rise from her cup. Did you ever think, she asked after a moment, that the same people who teach us to be patient are the ones who hope we'll stay quiet? Julian looked at her and didn't say a word because he knew she wasn't asking for one. The doorbell rang soft and sudden. Renee walked to the front door and opened it. It was Carla standing with a plain envelope in hand. I didn't want to send this by email, she said. It's a formal acknowledgement of how things were handled. It includes a letter of apology and a separate statement signed by the board. Renee didn't take the envelope. Carla cleared her throat. I know it doesn't fix anything, but we wanted you to know we saw it, all of it. Renee looked her in the eye. That's a start, she said quietly, but remember, respect doesn't come in a folder. Carla nodded. Understood. She turned to leave, but before she stepped off the porch, she stopped. For what it's worth, Carla added, they're scared now, not of you, of being seen. Renee gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then closed the door. Back in the kitchen, Julian was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone. Anything new, she asked. Actually, yes, someone from Sandwell Partners messaged me asking about you. Said they heard you're back in the game. Renee grinned. Tell them I don't do games anymore, just results. He laughed. I'll pass it along. They sat together in the kitchen, the quiet no longer heavy, just full of clarity, full of choice. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about truth, about being seen and choosing not to shrink even when others tried to box you. And Renee didn't scream, didn't post, didn't plead. She walked out, then built her own door. If this story made you feel something, share it, because somewhere someone's being overlooked right now and they deserve to be seen. Subscribe for more stories that reveal what's beneath the surface and remind us what real strength looks like.